A car mechanic can't fix trucks, the boss told the unemployed mechanic. Then Tuesday morning arrived with the stifling heat characteristic of Guadalajara in July. Miguel Angel Hernandez, 38, arrived early at the Rodriguez auto repair shop, as he had done for the past 15 years. The smell of burnt oil and hot metal was as familiar to him as the aroma of the coffee his wife made every morning. But that day, something in the air felt different. Don Roberto Rodriguez, the owner of the shop, a burly 60-year-old man with a gray mustache and hands weathered by decades of hard work, was waiting for him in the main yard. Next to him, imposing and silent, stood a Kenworth cargo truck, navy blue with its hood open, displaying its mechanical innards as if in defiance. "Miguel, I need to talk to you," said Don Roberto, avoiding eye contact. Miguel felt a knot in his stomach. In 15 years, his boss had never had any trouble looking him in the eye. He walked toward him, wiping his hands on his gray overalls with the workshop logo embroidered on the chest. "Is something wrong, Don Roberto?" The older man sighed deeply, looking at the truck and then back at Miguel. "Look, Miguel, you're an excellent car mechanic. The best sedans, the most complicated sports cars, modern compacts with all their electronics. No one fixes them like you do. But the business is changing." Miguel felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Don Roberto continued, his voice laden with what seemed like genuine sadness. "The big contracts now are with transportation companies, trucks, trailers, heavy machinery. I need people who specialize in that. And you," he paused, searching for the right words. "A car mechanic can't fix trucks." The words fell like stones on Miguel. 15 years of loyalty, of arriving before anyone else, of staying late when necessary, of perfecting every detail in every vehicle that passed through his hands. "Don Roberto, I can learn. Give me a chance. I've always been a quick learner, you know that?" The old mechanic shook his head, and for the first time in the conversation, his eyes met Miguel's. "I've already hired 2 diesel specialists. I'm sorry, Miguel, I really am. I'll give you your full severance pay with a bonus for all these years. But I can't keep someone who can't work on what is now 80% of my business." Miguel left the workshop at 11 a.m. with a cardboard box containing his personal tools, some photographs stuck to his locker, and the envelope with his severance pay. The midday sun beat down relentlessly on the streets of the neighborhood. He got into his old 1995 Subaru, a car he had kept in impeccable condition for years, and sat there with his hands on the steering wheel without starting the engine. His phone vibrated. It was a message from his wife. "Laura, what do you want to eat today, my love? I stopped by the market, and there are some beautiful tomatoes to make enchiladas." Miguel looked at the screen but couldn't respond. How could he tell her he had just lost his job? They had a mortgage, monthly expenses. His mother lived with them and needed medication for her diabetes. Laura worked part-time in a clothing store, but her salary barely covered the basics. Finally, he started the engine and drove aimlessly through the streets of Guadalajara. He passed by Calzada Independencia, lined with shops and street vendors. The traffic was heavy, trucks slowed him down, minibuses and taxis cut in without warning. Everything seemed different now, as if the city itself were judging him. He stopped at a park near the Los Niños Héroes roundabout and sat on a bench in the shade of an ash tree. He watched the people go by. Ice cream vendors, office workers on their lunch break, retirees feeding pigeons. Everyone seemed to have a purpose, a place to belong. He took out his cell phone and searched the internet for heavy truck mechanics courses in Guadalajara. Several results appeared, but when he saw the prices, his heart sank. Thousands of pesos he didn't have. Some courses lasted 6 months, a year. He couldn't go that long without income. A car mechanic can't fix trucks. Don Roberto's words echoed in his head. All his experience, his skill, his knowledge, what good were they now? When he finally got home, it was almost 5 p.m. Laura greeted him at the door, wearing her apron and a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "Miguel, what happened?" He put his toolbox on the floor and hugged her silently. He didn't need to say anything else. The first few days after being fired were the hardest. Miguel got up at 6 a.m. out of habit, but he no longer had a workshop to go to. He sat at the kitchen table while Laura made breakfast, pretending to read the newspaper when in fact he was staring blankly at it, lost in his thoughts. Honey, you have to eat something, Laura would say, placing a plate of eggs and beans in front of him. I'm not hungry, Miguel Angel Hernandez. You're not going to do this to me. You need strength to look for work. His wife was right, as always. Laura was a practical woman, one of those who didn't collapse in the face of crisis, but rolled up her sleeves and looked for solutions. They had been married for 14 years, and he loved her deeply for that strength that complemented him. That first week, Miguel visited 12 auto repair shops in different neighborhoods of Guadalajara. He carried his printed resume, copies of his certifications, and letters of recommendation that he had accumulated over the years. At the Hernandez workshop near the food market, the manager didn't even let him finish speaking. Experience with diesel, right? But I've been working at I need people who know about trucks. I'm sorry. At Auto Servicio Jalisco in the industrial zone, the response was similar. And at Mecánica González and Taller Técnico del Norte and everywhere else, the story repeated itself. Everyone was looking for heavy vehicle specialists or, at best, general mechanics who would accept miserable wages. 4,000 pesos a month, Miguel asked the owner of a small workshop in Tlaquepaque. Don Armando, with all due respect, that's not even enough to cover my basic expenses. The man, who couldn't have been more than 30 years old, shrugged. That's all there is, buddy. If you don't like it, there are 20 others waiting outside. Miguel left with his dignity wounded. That was what his experience was worth now, 4,000 pesos a month. One afternoon, while having coffee at a street stall near the cathedral, he met Javier, a mechanic in his 50s who was in a similar situation. I've been looking for 3 months, Javier told him, stirring his coffee with a plastic spoon. I worked for 22 years in the same workshop, and from one day to the next, they told me that it was no longer profitable to keep me on, that it was cheaper to hire kids fresh out of school. And what have you been doing? Miguel asked. I've been hustling here and there, doing freelance work, so to speak. I stand on a street corner with my tools and wait for someone who needs an oil change or a minor repair. It's not much, but it's something. Miguel looked at Javier with a mixture of admiration and sadness. That was his future, becoming a traveling mechanic, competing with dozens of others on the city's street corners. At night, Laura and he would review the family finances on the old computer they had in the dining room. The numbers didn't lie. With the severance pay, they had enough to survive 2, maybe 3 months if they were very careful. After that, he could look for a full-time job, Laura suggested one night. The store has offered me more hours. No, Miguel replied more firmly than he intended. You already do enough. I'll find something. It's not a matter of pride, Miguel. It's a matter of survival. I know, but give me a little more time. His mother, Doña Esperanza, a 70-year-old woman with arthritis and diabetes, watched these conversations from her rocking chair in the living room without saying a word. One night, while Miguel was washing the dishes, she approached him. My son, when your father died, I was left alone with 3 children. I thought I wouldn't be able to do it, that we were going to starve to death, but we made it through. How did you do it, Mom? I wasn't proud. I took any job, even ones I thought were beneath me. I sold tamales, washed other people's clothes, and babysat. It wasn't what I had dreamed of for my life, but it kept us alive. And look, you grew up well, you studied, you are good people. Miguel hugged his mother. He knew she was right, but something inside him resisted. He was a skilled mechanic. He had years of experience. Why should he settle for less? The next day, he decided to expand his search, printed more copies of his resume, and visited car dealerships, large chain auto service centers, and even motorcycle repair shops. At a Nissan dealership, the interview seemed promising at first. You look good, said the human resources manager, a young man with glasses and a tie. But I see you don't have any recent certifications. You know how to work with the latest computerized diagnostic systems. Miguel Tituo had worked with some computerized systems, but the newer models were significantly different from what he knew. I can learn quickly. I always have. The manager smiled politely, a smile Miguel had already learned to recognize as a friendly farewell. We'll call you if something comes up. He knew they wouldn't. 1 week turned into 2, then 3. Miguel felt his anxiety growing every day. He would wake up in the middle of the night, mentally calculating how much money they had left. how long they could stretch each peso. Laura didn't complain, but he noticed the small savings she made by buying the cheapest brands at the supermarket, walking instead of taking the bus when she could, turning off the lights even during the day. Finally, one Friday afternoon, as Miguel was walking down a street near downtown, he saw something that caught his attention. It was a small shop with a sign that read, "Mechanic Wanted, Experience with Cars, Bring Your Own Tools." He went in without thinking twice. The shop was called Auto Servicio Moreno, a modest place located on a corner in the Seattle neighborhood. It was nothing impressive. Two hydraulic ramps, unpainted concrete walls, an old desk where a woman in her 40s was typing on a calculator, and the inevitable smell of oil and solvent that Miguel had been breathing for 15 years. "Good afternoon," Miguel greeted her. "I saw the sign outside." The woman looked up and examined him from head to toe. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore a grease-stained workshop t-shirt. "Are you a mechanic?" 15 years of experience. I have references and certifications. Do you have your tools in the car? Wait here." The woman got up and went to the back of the workshop. Miguel took the opportunity to look around the place with a critical eye. Everything was clean and organized despite being old. The tools hung in their assigned places. The used tires were stacked neatly. He liked that. It said a lot about how the business was run. A few minutes later, a man of about 55 appeared, thin, with completely gray hair and a serious expression. He was wearing immaculate blue overalls. "I'm Ricardo Moreno, owner of the workshop. Elena tells me you have experience." Miguel Angel Hernandez introduced himself, extending his hand. 15 years at Rodriguez Mechanical Workshop. "Rodriguez, I know Don Roberto. Why did you leave?" Miguel decided to be honest. "He fired me. He's focusing on heavy trucks, and I only have experience with cars." Ricardo nodded slowly, showing no surprise or judgment. "What can you do? Everything related to gasoline engines, repairs, maintenance, diagnostics. I'm good with electrical systems, transmissions, suspension. I've worked with American, Japanese, and European brands. Computerized systems." Miguel hesitated for a second before answering. "The basic ones, yes. The more modern ones, I'd have to get up to speed." Ricardo remained thoughtful, scratching his chin. "Look, Miguel, I'm going to be straight with you. I can't pay you what you probably earned with Rodriguez. This is a small, family-run workshop, but the work is steady and I treat my people well." "How much are you offering?" $7,000 a month to start, plus a percentage of the profits from the jobs you do. If you're as good as you say, you could make between $9,000 and $11,000 a month. It was less than he earned before, but more than the miserable offers he had received elsewhere. Miguel did some quick mental calculations. With Laura's salary in this, they could survive. They wouldn't be well off, but they could pay the bills. "When can I start?" Ricardo smiled for the first time. "First, I want to see how you work. There's a 2010 Jetta out there with electrical problems. The customer says it shuts down at traffic lights. Take a look at it. Tell me what's wrong and give me an estimate. If you convince me, you start on Monday." Miguel felt a rush of adrenaline. He hadn't touched an engine in weeks. He rolled up the sleeves of the overalls he still wore out of habit and headed for the vehicle. It was a gray Jetta A5 in fair condition. He opened the hood and began his inspection. Elena, the woman at the front desk, approached with a basic diagnostic scanner. "In case you need it." "Thanks." Miguel connected the scanner to the OBD port and checked the error codes. There were several problems with the crankshaft position sensor, injection system faults, alternator alerts, but the codes didn't always tell the whole story. He began to physically check, feeling the hoses, inspecting the electrical connections, testing the battery with a multimeter he had brought in his toolbox. After 20 minutes, he had his diagnosis. He returned to Ricardo, who was waiting for him at the desk reviewing some invoices. "Well, the main problem is the alternator. It's failing and not charging the battery properly, which is why it stalls at high speeds when the voltage drops. But it also has a faulty crankshaft position sensor, which causes the car to not start well when cold and needs urgent injector cleaning. Time and cost with generic parts, about $3,500 in parts. Labor time, 1 full day. If the customer wants original parts, it would be about $5,000. I would recommend the latter. The car is in good overall condition and worth investing in. Ricardo took notes on a piece of paper, comparing them to something he had on his computer. Then he looked up and extended his hand. It matches exactly what I diagnosed this morning. Welcome to the team, Miguel. Monday at 8 a.m., Miguel shook his hand firmly, feeling something like hope for the first time in weeks. That night, when he got home, Laura was making dinner. Doña Esperanza was watching television in the living room, a news program talking about traffic in the city. Laura called Miguel from the doorway. I have news. His wife came out of the kitchen drying her hands on a dish towel. Good or bad? I got a job. I start on Monday. Laura dropped the dishcloth and hugged him tightly. Miguel felt the tension leave his body. It wasn't the best job in the world. It wasn't what he had had before, but it was a start. It was an opportunity. I told you, Laura whispered in his ear. I knew you would make it. That night, they ate dinner with a peacefulness they hadn't felt in weeks. Doña Esperanza even joked that now Miguel could buy her pills without having to choose between medicine and food. Mom, I never had to choose, Miguel lied affectionately. Of course you did, my son, but you're a good son and you didn't let me know. The weekend went by quickly. Miguel took the opportunity to organize his tools and check that everything was in order. He also searched the internet for tutorials on the latest computer systems. If he was going to work at this new place, he wanted to be as prepared as possible. Monday arrived with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Miguel arrived at the Moreno service station 15 minutes before 8 a.m. Ricardo was already there drinking coffee. Punctual. I like that. Come on. I'll introduce you to the team. In addition to Ricardo and Elena, there were two other mechanics. Tomas, a 25-year-old specializing in transmissions, and Andres, a 40-year-old who mainly did bodywork and painting. This is Miguel, Ricardo introduced them. He comes from the Rodriguez workshop. He's a whiz with engines, so if you have any questions, don't be shy about asking him. The first few days were about adaptation. The pace of the workshop was different from what Miguel was used to. At Rodriguez's, there were established routines, corporate clients, and times measured to the second. Here, it was more organic, more improvised, but also more human. During the first month, Miguel worked on dozens of vehicles. A Chevy with suspension problems, a Sentra that failed emissions testing, a Suru just like his with a blown engine. Each job reminded him why he loved this trade. The satisfaction of diagnosing a complex problem, of hearing the perfect purr of a well-tuned engine, of seeing a customer smile when their car was working again. He also learned a lot. Tomas taught him tricks for working with modern transmissions. Elena, who turned out to be Ricardo's sister, shared with him her techniques for dealing with difficult customers, and Ricardo himself passed on the workshop's philosophy. Honesty above all else, quality over quantity. If a customer doesn't need a repair, don't sell it to them, Ricardo told him one afternoon. In the short term, you lose money, but in the long term, you gain trust. And trust is the only thing that sets us apart from the charlatans. Miguel absorbed everything like a sponge. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was growing professionally, not just repeating the same thing he had been doing for 15 years. However, not everything was perfect. The salary, although enough to survive, did not allow them to save. One afternoon, the washing machine at home broke down and they had to borrow money from Laura's sister. Miguel hated having to do it. It's temporary, Laura assured him. When you get your raise, we'll be able to save. But Miguel knew that in a small workshop, raises didn't come easily, and the question lingered in his mind. Was this all that awaited him? Working until he was 60 in modest workshops, barely earning enough to live on day to day. 3 months had passed since Miguel started at Moreno Auto Service. The routine had become comfortable. Arrive at 8 a.m., check the day's work list, have coffee with his co-workers during the 11 a.m. break, go home at 6 p.m. The work was steady, and although money was tight, at least the bills were paid on time. One Tuesday morning, everything changed. Miguel was under a car doing an oil change when he heard the unmistakable roar of a diesel engine. The sound reverberated through the workshop, making the tools on their hooks vibrate. He slid out from under the car, just in time to see a medium-sized cargo truck, a white Isuzu NPR, slowly pull into the workshop yard. Ricardo came out of his office with a frown. They didn't take trucks. The workshop wasn't equipped for that, A burly man in his 60s with a Chivas cap and a sweaty work shirt got out of the truck. "Are you the owner?" Ricardo Moreno asked. "At your service. But look, sir, we don't work on trucks." I know," said the man, taking off his cap to wipe the sweat from his brow. "But I'm desperate. I'm Don Fermin Castillo. I have a soft drink distribution company, and this truck is one of my 3 vehicles. The other 2 are on the road, and this one broke down this morning. I called 3 specialized workshops, and none of them can see me until next week. My business is coming to a standstill." "I understand, Don Fermin, but seriously, we only work on light vehicles here. We don't have the tools or the experience to. I'll pay you double what you charge for a normal job," Don Fermin interrupted. "Triple if you need it. Just check it out. Tell me what's wrong with it. If it's something you can fix, perfect. If not, at least I'll know what to tell the mechanic when I finally find one." Ricardo was thoughtful. Miguel could see the gears turning in his head. The extra money would be very useful, but the risk of messing with something they didn't know was high. "Let me talk to my team," Ricardo finally said. The 4 mechanics gathered in the back of the workshop, away from the customer. "I don't know, boss," said Tomas. "That's a medium-sized truck. Diesel engines are a whole different world. I wouldn't even joke about doing it," added Andres. "It's one thing to paint a pickup truck and another to work as a mechanic on something like that." Ricardo looked at Miguel. "What do you think?" Miguel had been watching the truck since he walked in. It was an Isuzu NPR with a 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine. He had seen a few like it at Don Roberto's workshop, although he had never worked directly with one. The basic principles were the same as any engine, but the specifications, the pressures, the electronics, everything was different. "A car mechanic can't fix trucks," Don Roberto's voice echoed in his memory. "I don't know if we can," Miguel admitted, "but I could at least diagnose it, see what's wrong with it. The worst that can happen is that we tell him we can't do it, and he loses nothing." Ricardo nodded slowly. "And if we make it worse, we're not going to take it apart," Miguel suggested. "We're just going to diagnose it without opening anything critical. If I see that it's something within my ability, I'll try. If not, we'll tell him honestly." "All right," Ricardo decided, "but this is your responsibility, Miguel. If something goes wrong, it's going to fall on you." Miguel felt the weight of those words, but he nodded. They returned to Don Fermin. "Let's take a look at it," said Ricardo, "but I can't promise anything. If we can fix it, we will. If not, at least we'll tell you what's wrong with it." "That's all I ask," replied Don Fermin, clearly relieved. Miguel approached the truck with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. It was considerably larger than any vehicle he had repaired in recent months. He opened the hood and found the engine, an Isuzu 4H1 inline cylinder, turbocharged, with intercooler. "Tell me what happened," he asked Don Fermin. "I was making a delivery in the American neighborhood. The truck was running fine. I turned off the engine to unload some boxes, and when I tried to start it again, nothing. The starter motor turns, but it won't start. It doesn't even trim on." Miguel nodded. That narrowed down the possibilities. He connected a diesel scanner he had borrowed from a neighboring workshop that same morning, anticipating that he might need it. Error codes appeared on the screen. Problems with the fuel system, common rail pressure sensor, high pressure pump, failures. He spent the next 2 hours investigating. He checked the fuel lines, tested the pressure at different points in the system, examined the injectors, checked the filters. Elena brought him water and coffee while he worked, and the other mechanics stopped by occasionally to see how he was doing. Finally, he found the problem. The fuel filter was completely clogged, but worse still, the high-pressure pump was failing. When Don Fermin tried to start the truck, the system had tried to compensate for the lack of pressure by forcing the pump, which had damaged it further. Miguel returned to Ricardo and Don Fermin, who was waiting anxiously. "I found the problem," Miguel said. "It's the high-pressure pump in the injection system. It's failing. You also need to change the fuel filter and check the injectors to make sure no impurities have entered." "Can you fix it?" Ricardo asked. Miguel took a deep breath. "I can try, but I need to get the parts, and it will take time. It's not a simple job. How long? If I get the parts today, I could have it ready in 2 days, maybe 3. Don Fermin looked desperate. 3 days without that truck will cost me a fortune. There's no way to do it faster. No, if you want it done right, Miguel replied firmly. Don Fermin, I'm going to be honest with you. This is not my area of expertise. I'll do my best. I'll do my research. I'll be careful, but if you want something fast and guaranteed, you'd better wait for a specialist. The dealer thought for a moment. Then he looked Miguel in the eye. Do you think you can do it? Miguel thought of Laura, of the bills piling up, of the sleepless nights spent calculating budgets. He thought about his mother taking medicine they could barely afford. He thought about the 3 months he had spent looking for work, hearing over and over again that a car mechanic was good for nothing else. Yes, he finally said, I can do it. Then go ahead. What followed were 2 intense days that Miguel would remember for the rest of his life. First, he had to locate the parts. High-pressure engine pumps were not common, and no local parts store had them in stock. He finally found one in Monterey that could be shipped by express delivery, but it cost almost twice what he had budgeted. When he gave Don Fermin the price, the man didn't bat an eye. Do it. Just make sure it's done right. The pump arrived the next day. Miguel spent the entire afternoon watching tutorials on YouTube, reading technical manuals he downloaded from specialized forums, and studying diagrams of the common rail injection system. Ricardo gave him permission to use the workshop computer for as long as he needed. This is important, Ricardo told him. Not just for Don Fermin, but for us too. If you can do this, Miguel, you're going to change things for the shop. The replacement process was meticulous and exhausting. Miguel worked with almost obsessive precision, checking every connection, every torque specification, every step of the procedure. Tomas helped him by holding tools. Elena brought him food because he refused to stop for lunch. At 7 p.m. on the second day, with the sun setting over Guadalajara, painting the sky orange and purple, Miguel connected the last hose and closed the hood. Moment of truth, he said, more to himself than to the others. He climbed into the truck's cab. The key was in the ignition. He turned it and heard the characteristic sound of the diesel engine turning once, twice, and starting. The engine roared to life, powerful and smooth. Miguel let it warm up, monitoring the gauges on the dashboard. Everything was fine. The oil pressure, the temperature, the electric system was working. He got out of the cab to find Ricardo, Tomas, Andres, and Elena applauding. Even Don Fermin, who had been waiting anxiously all this time, had tears in his eyes. You did it, Miguel, said Ricardo, patting him on the back. You did it, but Miguel didn't allow himself to celebrate yet. He ran tests for the next hour, driving the truck around the neighborhood, checking that everything was responding correctly. Finally, satisfied that the job was complete, he returned to the workshop. Don Fermin handed him an envelope with cash. Here's your payment with the triple I promised. And let me tell you something, young man. You saved my business. If you ever need work, come see me. That night, Miguel came home later than usual, but with a feeling he hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't just satisfaction at having completed a difficult job. It was something deeper. He had faced his greatest fear and won. He had proven, mainly to himself, that he could adapt, that he could learn, that a car mechanic could indeed fix trucks if he set his mind to it. Laura greeted him at the door. You look different, Isabel. I feel different, Miguel replied, hugging her. He didn't know that this repair would be the beginning of something much bigger. News of the repaired truck spread quickly in the small, connected world of Guadalajara's transporters. Don Fermin turned out to be an influential figure in the Metropolitan Area Distributors Association, and he didn't miss the opportunity to tell how a mechanic from a modest workshop had saved his business when the specialist couldn't help him. A week after the Isuzu was repaired, a Freightliner truck showed up at the workshop, then a 3.5-ton pickup truck. Next, a Mercedes-Benz Sprinter with injection problems. Each job was a new challenge. Each vehicle was an opportunity to learn. Ricardo was elated, but also concerned. Miguel, this is growing too fast, he said one afternoon, as they reviewed the work schedule. We have 4 trucks booked for next week, but if we specialize in this, we're going to lose our car customers. What if we do both? Miguel suggested. With what space? With what equipment? The ramps we have can't support heavy vehicles. We would need to invest in specialized tools and training. Miguel had been thinking about exactly that. Instead of sleeping, He had spent the last few nights doing calculations, researching equipment prices, and mentally designing how the workshop could be reorganized. Ricardo, can I make a suggestion? They sat down in the office with coffee and cookies that Elena had brought. Miguel took out a notebook where he had drawn plans and written down numbers. Look, the lot next door is empty, right? Yes, it belongs to Don Ruperto. It's been abandoned for years. And if we rent it, we can expand the workshop. We'll leave this space for light vehicles, as usual, and fit out the new space for heavy vehicles. We'll invest in a 4-post lift, industrial pneumatic tools, and a larger compressor. Ricardo leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. That's a lot of money, Miguel. I don't know if I can do it. That's why I want to propose something else. Miguel took a deep breath. Let me be your partner. Silence filled the office. Ricardo looked at Miguel in surprise. Partner, I have the severance money Don Roberto gave me. I've never touched it because I was saving it for emergencies. It's about 150,000 pesos. I know it's not much for an investment like this, but it's a start. We could take out a loan for the rest, and I would co-sign with you, Miguel. That's very risky. What if things don't work out? And what if they do? Ricardo remained silent, looking at the numbers Miguel had written down. Cost projections, revenue estimates, analysis of the transportation market in Guadalajara. You have to talk it over with, well, your wife, he finally said. It's her money too. I already talked to her about it. That night, 3 days earlier, Miguel had come home with the proposal in mind, but unsure of how to bring it up. Laura was in the kitchen making potato tacos for dinner. Laura, I need to talk to you about something important. She had stopped what she was doing and sat down with him at the table. Miguel explained everything to her, the opportunity, the investment, the risks, the potential rewards. We could lose everything, he had admitted. If things go wrong, we'll be left with no savings and in debt. Laura had taken his hand. Miguel, in these 3 months you spent without a job, I saw you fade away a little every day. And in these last few weeks, since you repaired that truck, I've seen you become yourself again. I haven't seen that light in your eyes in years. If this is what you want to do, you have my support. Are you sure? Absolutely. Besides, we didn't get married to live in fear. We got married to build something together. Now, in Ricardo's office, Miguel conveyed that same certainty. My wife agrees, Doña Esperanza agrees, and I know this can work, Ricardo. I can feel it in my bones. Ricardo rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture Miguel had learned to recognize as a sign that he was processing something big. All right, he finally said, but let's do this right. No rushing. We'll get the loan, draw up a formal contract, everything legal. And if we're going to be partners, we'll need to establish the rules clearly from the beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Miguel and Ricardo visited banks, negotiated with Don Ruperto for the lease of the land, and consulted with lawyers to structure the partnership. Elena, who turned out to have a keen eye for numbers, became the official administrator of the expansion project. Tomas and Andres, skeptical at first, were infected with enthusiasm when they saw that things were materializing. They even helped with the basic construction of the new space on their days off. Do you think this is going to work? Tomas asked one afternoon as they painted the walls of the new workshop. It has to work, Andres replied, because I've already stopped looking for another job, betting that it will. The initial investment was higher than planned. The 4-post lift cost almost twice as much as budgeted because they had to import it from the United States. The specialized tools, the diagnostic equipment for diesel engines, it all added up. The bank loan grew from 200,000 pesos to 350,000. There were nights when Miguel couldn't sleep, tormented by the magnitude of what they were taking on. One early morning, Laura found him in the kitchen, calculating numbers in a notebook. What's wrong? She asked, sitting down next to him. What if we're wrong? What if the market isn't as big as we think? What if I don't get enough customers to pay off the loan? Laura took the notebook from his hands and closed it. Miguel, do you remember when you asked me to marry you? Of course, in Agua Azul Park, next to the fountain, you were so nervous that you dropped the ring. We had to search for it in the grass for 15 minutes. And when you finally found it and offered it to me, do you know what made me say yes? What? That even though you were scared to death, you did it anyway. That courage to do the important things, even if they scare you. That's what I love about you. Don't lose that now. 6 weeks after the initial proposal, the new workshop space was ready. It was Friday afternoon and they had decided to have a small opening party. Don Fermin was the guest of honor, along with other transporters who had become regular customers. Miguel walked around the new space, still incredulous that this was real. The four-post lift was installed and working. The walls were painted industrial blue. There was a designated diagnostic area with state-of-the-art computers and scanners. The tools, many of them new, hung neatly organized on a board system. Ricardo approached him with 2 soft drinks. "What do you think, partner?" The word partner still sounded strange, but exciting. "I can't believe we did it." "We didn't do it," Ricardo corrected. "We're doing it. This is just the beginning." Don Fermin gave a short speech thanking Miguel for saving his business months ago and congratulating them on the expansion. Other transporters promised to bring their vehicles. Elena took note of all the contacts. When the small celebration ended and everyone left, the workshop team stayed there looking at their creation. "We need a new name," Tomas said. "Auto Servicio Moreno sounds too small for what we are now." "How about Taller Moreno Hernandez?" Andres suggested. Ricardo and Miguel looked at each other and smiled. "Taller Moreno Hernandez," Ricardo repeated. "Specialist in light and heavy vehicles." "I like it." "Me too," Miguel agreed. The first few months of operation in the new space were difficult. There was a steep learning curve. Miguel had to study systems he had never touched before. Allison transmissions, Eaton hydraulic systems, Bendix air brakes. Each truck brought new challenges. There were mistakes. Once he misdiagnosed a problem in a Kenworth and they had to redo the work without charging. Another time, he ordered the wrong parts for an international and they lost 3 days waiting for the correct replacements. Every mistake hurt, especially because he knew they were operating on tight margins. But there were also victories. A long-haul driver who had been stranded in Guadalajara with his trailer arrived desperate one Saturday afternoon. Miguel worked all night to repair the brake system. The driver was able to continue his route on Sunday morning and became one of their most loyal promoters. A logistics company entrusted them with the maintenance of its entire fleet, trucks of different makes and sizes. It was their first corporate contract and gave them the financial stability they needed. 6 months after the expansion, they were about to pay off the first half of the loan. A year later, the business was not only sustainable but profitable. They hired 2 more mechanics, both young men eager to learn. Miguel found himself doing something he never imagined: teaching. The new mechanics saw him as their mentor. They constantly asked him questions, wanting to learn from his experience. At first, it felt strange, but gradually he began to enjoy it. One afternoon, while teaching one of the new mechanics, Sergio, how to diagnose problems in an electronic fuel injection system, Ricardo approached him. "Are you good at this?" he asked. "Teaching." "It's strange," Miguel admitted. "A year and a half ago, I was getting fired because I was supposedly good for nothing but fixing cars. And now I'm here teaching someone how to repair trucks. Things take strange turns, don't they?" Very strange. The business continued to grow. They had to expand once again, this time buying the land next door instead of just renting it. Now there were 4 partners: Ricardo, Miguel, Elena, who had proven herself so valuable that she deserved a share, and surprisingly, Tomas, who had invested his savings to get a small percentage. Laura got a better job at a boutique downtown, which further improved their financial situation. They were finally able to fix up the house, buy a new washing machine, and even start saving for a family vacation, their first in years. Doña Esperanza, observing all this from her rocking chair, said to Miguel one night, "Your father would be proud of you, my son." "Do you think so, Mom?" "I don't think so. I know so. Not because of the money or the business, but because when you fell, you got back up. Because when they told you you couldn't, you proved you could. That's what matters." 2 years after being fired, Miguel found himself in a situation he never would have imagined. He was sitting in his office, now much larger and more modern, reviewing proposals to open a 3rd workshop location, this time in Tonalá. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello, Miguel Hernandez. This is Roberto Rodriguez." Miguel felt a knot in his stomach. It was Don Roberto, his former boss, the person who had fired him 2 years earlier. Don Roberto. What a surprise. "Miguel, I've heard about your workshop, about how well you're doing. I wanted to congratulate you and also apologize. Apologize for what I said to you that day about the car mechanic who can't fix trucks. I was wrong. You proved that with dedication and willpower, you can learn anything. Miguel didn't know what to say for a moment. All the anger, frustration, and pain he had felt during those months of unemployment had transformed over time into something different. It wasn't resentment, it was understanding. Thank you, Don Roberto. But you know what? You weren't completely wrong. A car mechanic can't fix trucks until he learns how to do it. And that's what I did. I learned. After hanging up, Miguel stared out the office window. He could see the workshop below, the constant movement of mechanics working on different vehicles, a Jetta on a ramp, a Freightliner truck on a four-post lift, a Silverado pickup truck being prepared for paint. Laura entered the office with 2 coffees. Everything okay? You look pensive. It was Don Roberto. He called to congratulate me and apologize. And how do you feel? Miguel took the coffee she offered him and hugged her. I feel good. I feel like a cycle has come to an end. When he fired me, I thought it was the end of the world, but it turned out to be the beginning of something better. Do you know what I admire most about you? Laura asked. What? That you never gave up? You could have settled for the first mediocre job they offered you. You could have accepted that a car mechanic is only good for fixing cars. But you didn't. You dared to do more. That night, Miguel came home earlier than usual. The three of them, he, Laura, and Doña Esperanza, had dinner together. They talked about everything and nothing. They shared anecdotes from the day and made plans for the weekend. After dinner, Miguel went out to the small backyard of his house. The sky over Guadalajara was clear. The stars, barely visible through the city's light pollution, made him think about everything that had happened in the last 2 years. The dismissal that had seemed like the worst moment of his life had become the catalyst for something extraordinary. He had learned that the labels others put on us, car mechanic, no future, too old to change, only have the power we give them. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Ricardo confirming that the Guadalajara Express Transport Company wanted them to handle the maintenance of its entire fleet of 25 trucks. This was the biggest contract they had ever landed. Miguel smiled and put his phone away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new things to learn. But that was the beauty of it all. It was no longer just about surviving or proving something to someone else. It was about building something of his own, growing every day, never stopping learning. In the workshop under the hood of that Isuzu truck 2 years ago, Miguel had discovered something more important than how to repair a diesel engine. He had discovered that the limits we believe we have are most often just lines we draw in our own minds. And those lines, like anything else, can be erased and redrawn. A car mechanic can't fix trucks, Don Roberto had told him that day. And he was right, but a mechanic who is willing to learn, to take risks, to not give up at the first obstacle. That mechanic can fix anything, can build anything, can turn a layoff into an opportunity, a crisis into a beginning, and a sentence of failure into a success story. Miguel went into the house, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. Tomorrow would be another day of work, another day of challenges, another day to prove, mainly to himself, that when someone tells you that you can't do something, you have 2 options: believe them or prove them wrong. He had chosen the latter, and that had made all the difference. M.